Hi, everybody. I'd like to just begin by paying respect to the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong Bunurong peoples, traditional custodians of the unceded land on which the university stands, and extend that respect to the Yorta Yorta and Dja Dja Wurrung people, traditional owners of the lands occupied by other University of Melbourne campuses, acknowledging the importance of Indigenous knowledges both within the academy and beyond. So I learned recently from Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, Dja Dja Wurrung and Noongar Ulam Wurrung artist and Woiwurrung language expert, Dr. Mandy Nicholson, that there's no word for acknowledgement in Woiwurrung, and she thinks with the idea of embracing country, that we are country, when we pay respect to and recognise the unique place held by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their continuous care for, connections to lands, skies and waterways, and their continuous connections for over 60,000 years. So I invite you to think with that idea of embracing country and that we are country as we begin this session this morning. This is our fourth Global Childhoods Research Hub seminar for 2025. Thank you for all making the time to be with us today online. The Global Childhoods Research Hub seminar series, for those of you who haven't attended before, positions children's lives, worldviews and futures at its core. These seminars connect childhood research and teaching, advancing Melbourne globally by bringing leading academics, early career researchers, research fellows, doctoral students, teachers and teacher candidates together around interdisciplinary themes and research problems. So including those related to equity and social justice, as well as disadvantage, climate change and sustainability, contemporary learning ecologies and multimodal lives. We think of education systems and children as activists in this space. So as the world continues to change through technologies, natural and man-made events or disasters and mobilities, this seminar series responds to the need for new structures and theorising of childhood and children's capabilities that create alternative research and policy narratives and new possibilities. So today we're incredibly excited to have Will Parnell speaking on finding our way into the 100 languages of children, storing our work in reused materials and digital landscapes, so living in and with documentation. Will Parnell is a professor in early childhood education and a pedagogical liaison with the Helen Gordon Child Development Centre at Portland State University. His specialty areas include rethinking readiness, disrupting traditional early childhood research, creating learning designs, documenting and making young children's learning visible in the early years. Will currently serves as the Foundation President of the National Association of Early Childhood Teacher Education in the United States and is the founder of the Inventing Lameda Portland project. Please join me in warmly welcoming Will for our seminar today. Thanks very much, Will.
Thank you. I actually have a little reading that I'd like to read to start off, and then we'll head into a small presentation. Hopefully, I will not talk too long. I'd like to be able to turn things to all of us having a conversation, but we'll see. Of course, what happens is I start to love on whatever it is that I'm wanting to share with you, and then it goes long. So I do want to start off with this reading because I read this. I read these words because I feel as though these words are really important to read in a particular way. They feel very deeply moving for me, and feel like something important that I need to express into the world. And so I'm also going to do that with the presentation, in parts of the presentation, but for this particular piece to kind of start us off from the place where I'm situated is really important. So our own research is locally situated in Portland State University on unceded ancestral and agential lands of the Multnomah, Clackamas, Tumwater, Chinook, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Tualatin, Kalapuya, and Molalla peoples, as well as many more tribes who made their homes, lives, and bustling societies along the Columbia River in what is currently known as the U.S. Pacific Northwest. The many stories, lived experiences, lived and living lives, languages, cultures, ways of knowing, doing, and being have been purposefully overwritten, and yet so much is still there to come out, to be told, known, and shared now. This labor is still so tentative and requires slow pedagogies, the harms and deeply rooted colonial logics permeate throughout our many experiences, so active movement toward an alternative route is methodological and plodding slowly. So with that, I'd like to plod slowly with you. I might try and go fast in some parts just to get us to the place where we get to talk a little bit. But I said to, well, we were talking just a little bit earlier, and I was saying that what I wrote to invite you all is a little bit different than what I've ended up creating. At the same time, there's very much an overlap. So what I'm going to share with you is a little piece about how documentation for me, living in and with documentation, became a way into understanding reuse in our origins. So this is one of the origin stories of our reuse practice in Helen Gordon Center, and I thought I would share this story that also leads to a couple years later and a return from children to visit again their story of their practice with reused materials and light and shadow and working in the city. So with that, let's see, hopefully I can advance my slide set here. Sorry that some of the photos may also appear a little older because the origin stories are definitely, oh, I'd say at this point, over 15 years old. But this is a photograph of us in the Light Studies exhibit that we exhibited inside of Gallery 114 in downtown Portland for our Portland First Thursday events, where the entire city comes downtown. Well, maybe not the entire city, but a lot of people. Or we used to, prior to the pandemic, we would come downtown and you would walk through galleries and you would take a look at the art across the city. So we became an exhibit of art expressed by children and children's learning made visible. And I'll show you some examples of what we did to make this possible. First, I want to just stop and focus a little bit on documentation and how that plays such a role for me, and also the way that I situate documentation in this process, because I think that it's a little bit different than what many writers and philosophers and folks think about these days. I worked quite extensively with Carla Rinaldi over years and learned alongside of her about the documentation approach that she was bringing forward in the work in Reggio Emilia, and that really influenced me to think about documentation as something potentially more than pedagogical. And I'm going to express that here. So there are many divergent points of view on what documenting digitally can mean in early childhood. Significantly, documentation is a way of living, learning, and making meaning together. The process of documenting, living, learning, and meaning making jointly through digital means opens new windows into how experiences are shaped and who can bear witness to them. This sort of documentation process can be pedagogical in nature when focused on learning and teaching in action and reflection, and it can also become more than pedagogical and relate openly to life experiences and the meaning of life we co-construct day by day. Herein, otherwise called through this presentation and the writing that I've done on this, let's see. Sorry, I lost my spot. Called life learning. So rather than thinking about learning in the classroom as a perspective that it's sort of its own thing that we do in a pedagogical terms, this is life learning. This is our everyday lived experience through breathing, through being, and naturally engaging. So let's see. To open educators, children, families, and communities to digital documentation of lived events, learning, and meaning we make with young children offers more perspective taking together, thus creating more shared voices and a sense of democracy, equity, and justice through open access and sharing and life learning. Jaminuti's work in a book that I have co-authored and co-edited with Jean Iorio reminds us that this culture of research grows with children, families, communities, and educators as co-protagonists when making digital documentation together. Um, Gianminuti says, the significance of documentation in creating a culture of research that is welcoming and hospitable. That's something that's underscored in our work that we've done together. Envision a film documentarian who is living in and with documents, imagining or previewing an idea of something ahead of time, recording events as they unfold, reviewing the recording for understanding, misunderstandings, surprises, mundane happenings, and so on, and returning the documents with co-protagonists to make meaning of the events of life unfolding, and then choosing what is made visible. Thus, early childhood digital documentation remains only partial and offers varying views into life learning. This notion of partial is important to understand digital documentation because partial means that the stories inside of the documentation can live on as part of an experience, always persisting and offering meanings. Different stories can come along tangentially, and this happens often when looking back at any recording of events, as in, remember when we did this and so many other things that we don't even see here in these pictures and in videos. There's a relativity in the partial that can help a community stay open to more rather than seeing a documented story as complete or fixed in time, space, and consciousness. This act of offering relativity when co-constructing and entangling meaning of lived experiences with a record of the lived experiences produces what Rinaldi often talks about as intersubjectivity. Rinaldi states that human understanding is always intersubjective, and that depth of understanding involves the ability to experience the curiosity, passions, joys, and angers of others with a process of empathy, perception, and identification with people who know how to recognize their own personal and cultural limitations. Determined recognition of our limitations, being reflexive, thinking like tossing a ball back and forth, tossing ideas back and forth, to find a stride between people's perception of the lived experience is paramount when documenting and employing methods of documentarians thinking with lived experience. Thinking with produces contingent knowledge rather than stagnant right answers, thus bringing about inquiry and a desire to know, learn, and grow in relationships with the more than human and material worlds. This way of working in documentation is inductive and generative, open to possible pathways forward in life learning. In my work with a former graduate student in 2012, we, I think, convey something as an important example of digital documentation as entanglement. Digital technologies can streamline sharing and documented records of learning, knowing, doing, and being. There's also very uneven terrain related to digital technologies across early education contexts. In places, generating enough energy to charge a digital device can be really challenging. Then there are ongoing ongoing re-education and costs related to collecting up and storing in online repositories or sharing in blogs, websites, and apps. This unevenness creates a swath of challenges for digital technology documentation practices. Equally as important are the ideas of equity, access, and time related to documentation afforded through digital technologies. Thinking to sharing digital documentation amongst people in and around schools, teachers, children, families, the local community around us serves to demonstrate life learning as a common good. Employing an open platform for a larger group of people, colleagues, parent groups, administrators, community participants, the bread shop down the street for us. We've had all kinds of interesting engagement. Let's see. could demonstrate new ways to understand children's lives. I think that that's something that I've learned from Reggio Emilia, that when you bring children's lives forward and make visible what they think and do in the world, it changes adulthood. Children's childhood can change adulthood. I've seen it. I've seen it happen. So that became something we felt was an important part of our practice, was to change adulthood through children's engagements. The efforts and onus sit on educators' shoulders. Ooh, uh-oh. And those who ultimately prepare and display stories of life learning. Most importantly is having the time, space, and resources set up for them to engage digital documentation work. In the digital world, the old ways begin to fall away, such as gluing down words, images, ideas that maintain a single story on paper. Digitally, the learning stories can continue along and metamorphosize as dynamic forces that proliferate the original ideas and find deeper meaning or even tangential understandings as we move along. Educators can more readily maneuver the digital field to design and show children's life learning, as well as create open modes of communication, chats, discussion boards for participants encountering the documentation, and then bringing that back to the children so children see what people are saying about what they think of the children's learning and their practices and their living, and so on and so forth. Although questions remain as to whom this work is for exactly, this query brings many possibilities. For example, if digital documentation is primarily for immediate family, then what is captured of life learning may be arranged differently than if for a broader community. If for extended family members, then determining how open source that must be plays a role. If for children themselves, then questions linger about how to share digital documentation with the children on a tablet, laptop, LCD projection, in printed out form. If for a community of educators, then what is being shared changes based on the nature and intentions in that community. Such decisions should be weighty because they have implications for the documentation and the forms of digital technologies used. All considerations and choices interact and entangle with children's life learning. Further, there's a matter into equitable views of children, which drastically influences the what and how of documenting with children. In various places around the globe, there's a confrontation with the portrayal of children as deficit, deficient, untapped, or lacking innate capabilities that must be communicated, shown, and trained up to understand. There's a colonial way of viewing the child as uncivilized, quote unquote, thereby, quote unquote, needing their empty vessel filled. Rather, as in what Carla Rinaldi conveys in 2006, she says, the image of the child is above all cultural and therefore social and political convention that makes it possible to recognize or not certain qualities and potentials in children, and to construe expectation and context that give value to such qualities and potentials, or on the contrary, negate them. When we believe about what we believe about children, thus becomes a determining factor in defining their social and ethical identity, their rights, and the educational context offered to them. Largely, Rinaldi reminds us of the ethical matters under our charge as documentarians. Then we had better know what we deeply believe about the nature of children, each child with us particularly, as we will confirm, demonstrate, and put forth narratives of the life learning through our reflexive remaking of the digital documents we're co-constructing with children. To the contrary, another question can emerge on how we stay open to alternative narratives from what we have known and understood of children as we co-create digital documentation. Staying with the questions of how the child is a knower, doer, experiencer alters the nature and processes of documentation and influences the choices of technologies and documentation pathways we choose. Coming to know Mal, Amante, Neff, and Gonzalez's 1992, so that's a long time ago. Some of you may not have been born. I was in grad school and I still didn't know these folks, but anyway, I love them. They're funds of knowledge, ways of thinking, inscribe a way forward in our making life learning visible, valued, and valuable. As I describe in 2021, quote, this openness offers us an abundance of consciousness that leads away from reductionism or deduction and the close down, out towards induction and the more. These considerations become a part of our ethical lines of thinking with digital documentation. So I'm going to share an example now next. So with this revisitation of light studies, actually it was reused studies really with light and shadow. 2 years after the gallery showing, Wheeler shares his thoughts about the project. I think they would learn that light is more than light, says Wheeler. Wheeler comes for a visit 2 years after he's left our school. He finds documents up of his digital light work. The director invites Wheeler to bring his friends back for another learning adventure. He invites 2 current elementary schoolmates who were in the project with him back in the Helen Gordon Center's kindergarten. They examine, they look, and they inquire. They reminisce. They review, they chat, they laugh. They remake. They listen. They act out their former lives and learning. They are satisfied and say they will come back again in another 2 years. Let's think about the ethical considerations of this light studies collaboration that had happened 2 years prior. Artists from Gallery 114 and children from the kindergarten at Helen Gordon Center came together to explore the subject of light. They also came together to explore that subject through reused materials. Through active experimentation, children developed theories about properties of light and shadow. Their ideas were represented in words, drawings, and physical expressions, and then re-represented by the artists in Gallery 114 with the children. And then we all played with a video and reused materials of children engaged with reused materials as adults later. And I'll show you how that worked. Okay, so wait, the ethical considerations, let's see. Dahlberg and Moss offer a contemporary view of schools for young children as places for political and ethical practices for children, educators, and families. Blaze, Ham, and Iorio in 2016, I know you know those folks, clarify why this is so importantly tied to ongoing narrations and documentation from within the school as a site for pervasive growth and community transformation. They say, it should be noted that the roots of pedagogical documentation are political, challenging the fascist discourse prevalent in Italy following World War II, and also prevalent in the United States. They also reinforce, Ham, Iorio, Blaze, that trio. I think it's Blaze, or Ham, and Iorio is how it's listed. They reinforce an alternative vision to the overregulated and over-controlled world, where teachers, children, and families become political actors rather than political objects. The ethical considerations are paramount as documentation ties to digital technologies and become widely accessible across community contexts, while co-evolving with schools' entangled life learning. Further, as conduits of narrated, demonstrated experiences through words, photos, videos, artifacts, digital documentarians must look deeply into the ethical practices of co-constructing with, rather than on, protagonists of the life learning. Guiding questions that lead these digital documentation practices include notions of who is involved in the educational project, who facilitates gathering documentation, what the focal points are, how the work is stored, shared, and organized, how the digital data is processed for sense making, and how the processing is reconsidered iteratively again and again to activate inspired knowledge and offer unique ways of seeing into the work at hand. Let's take a look at the work at hand. Context and place are vital in a process of documenting as well, particularly particularity of place speaks volumes towards relationality, reciprocal exchanges and communications, and placement, hospitality, welcome, invitation, and interactions with the digital landscapes of documentation. For example, working with the Downtown Gallery is a place hosting digital documentation. This gallery opens its doors to the public on first Thursday of every month. For several months, children, educators, and artist educators digitally video and document children's playful inquiry with light, shadow, and reuse cycled plastics. These videos and documents of children's ideas are set up and shared as the gallery's exhibit. The exhibit is also video recorded for even more digital documentation of life learning during the visitations later in the gallery. The gallery hosts the digital and technological documentation of a 10-minute looped video of children's shadows, their silhouettes, playing with reused materials up against a light box. This video of children's original work is shared in the gallery along a backdrop set up near the entrance of the gallery. Open spaces with precise materials the children used are placed on the floor, and a sign invites gallery guests saying, "Go ahead, follow our silhouettes." As guests enter, materials beckon for engagement because they are lying next to the video, showing children manipulating them against the bright light box. For visitors, it's easy to know what to do and also to discover a learning journey through the prior learning experiences of children, materials, and lightbox silhouettes, moving about in the digital landscape. Visitors know they're being video recorded just as the children had known because they see themselves in real time on a nearby laptop screen that tells them so. In this example, the digital technology documentation shown in video creates an alternative digital landscape space inside of the real gallery space, thus becoming a place that holds the real and the digital landscape simultaneously for new and more life learning to occur. This is a place where former and new ideas can flourish together, from the original digital documentation to the now of visitors being documented while learning about the children, materials, shadows, and light as they play with these same ideas as children, following the children's silhouettes and their own imaginings. It's complicated. It's a lot going on in one idea. Those artists were amazing. The illustration is one of the million forms of documentation used using digital technology engagements, an extensive form involving a community of gallery goers, the early learning families, educators, artist educators from the gallery, and the community and the children. Children did have more opportunities to work in the gallery and also celebrate their life learning documentation accomplishments. Children's additional visits were digitally documented and reshared in a blog. This example only happened due to key features, and I won't get into those now. Rather than thinking this example should be reproduced across every context and reduced to a formulaic curricular exercise that is a tick box to completion, imagine each educational project offering a digital documentation. Something unique, unrepeatable sets of experiences, all holding and producing value for more opportunities across divergent ways of knowing, doing, and being. This openness to the endless variety of documentation and making life learning visible, valued, and valuable is an idea that can drive narrative and meaning making. So as I wind this down, Pacini, Ketchbaum, Numalo, Coker, Elliott, and Sanchez, quite a crew of writers, in 2015 share that pedagogical narration stays in the contradictions and ambiguities that we in early childhood education sometimes think cannot be part of our practices. They go on to dispute the universalist approaches to ethics that proliferate early education. To add to this universalist idea is, this universalist ideology is gaining traction right now through many national organizations here in the States, standardized curriculum, tick box assessments, and mandates put upon early childhood education writ large. Now, when I go out and I speak in engagements all over the place, I hear teachers say, how do I do that, what you just showed us, and meet the standard I'm trying to meet? Oh, I think I can do that when I meet the standard X. And it's like, oh no, this is where we are. Anyway, instead, encouraging a multiplicity of encounters, experiences, and ways of knowing, doing, and being, as expressed and given visibility and documentation, and pronounced, highlighted, and augmented through digital technological means, offers complexity and multiplicity and meaning. And I think that's the goodness of life. So there's a caution, and I just want to say this is my former doctoral student's dissertation research in 2019. She writes the documentation abets early childhood educators in understanding children and childhood in a way that is different than just classifying children's abilities and skill sets. And documentation embraces the prospect of an innovative perspective of what school can be rather than a redundant regurgitation. Her dissertation was on writing about a platform that teachers use in the United States in schools that have purchased the TS Gold platform. TS Gold allows you to upload upload photos and tick box how the photo shows what the child has learned. And what she said in her research, what her findings show, is that teachers moved to less complex thinking in their assessment of young children through this practice. And that's scary to me. It's a scary prospect. Anyway, so justice in the end of the day. This is my last slide, everybody. If a socially just undertaking speaks back to power through equitable co-participation in the various social constructions of life, such as socially, economically, politically, culturally, communally, and in our context, educationally. What happens when children and educators and adults chronicle and act as documentarians? Here, socially relevant issues hold the potential to rise to the surface, inscribe in and through digital documents, and bring up conceptions for change. This is Dahlberg and Moss's revelations of school as a socio-political place of paramount importance for us all. Centering on persistently incomplete journeys together in early childhood digital technological documentation, while acknowledging the power dynamics to expose injustices, opens communities to co-construct equitable and just learning places for all children. To digitally document and make meaning equitably and ethically while reshaping the children, educator, families, and communities' life learning, all of our life learning, not just the children's, is an endeavor worthy of a lifetime. Thus, Rinaldi makes most sense as she declares, dreams are a risk. Dreams are a risk. So too is documentation and the dialogue with other countries. Maybe because life is a risk. They are a risk and a strength. Dreams and documentation. I wish to add that perhaps found in the more of digital and technological documentation are risk and strength entangled to stand against dominant and universalizing winds. We can do it. That's it. Okay, so with that, I just want to show you what our reuse center has turned into now. 2010 was our first year, and now we are 2025. We worked with Reggio Emilia. I took 4 people from my community to go over there, 4 different community participants from various schools. And my dean afforded it for us to take people, and a couple schools helped chip in. We learned how to create the Remita Center. We came back to Portland. With this project, now what we do is we teach into the community. And I've got a 4-week summer class in teaching about our project and the learning we did in Reggio and what we've brought back over the years. I've written quite extensively on this in my own writing and on the work that we've done here. So all the way from the Shiny Fish Project, which is a local cultural aspect to fishing in the Pacific Northwest and how we brought that forward through reuse by being gifted all sorts of parts of fishing poles and then creating shiny fish and looking at genetically modified farm raised and freshwater fish and the differences there and what genetic modification does and how all of that is colonizing effect and what we did with the dams over time and now how those are being dismantled right now. And within 1 year's time of dismantling one of our large dams in the Salem area, which is about an hour south of Portland, we already have new fish entering back into the life of the river. And that work has largely been held by many tribes who have come through seeking restitution with the Willamette River. So at any rate, that's one of the projects. Another is the is the plastic bottle caps and the work that I did taking plastic bottle caps and the documentarians' work from Midway Islands, an island very far distances from any continent in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where plastic was killing birds because the birds were ingesting the plastic and to the point where they were filled with plastic. And he documented the death experiences. And I asked teachers and I asked teacher educators and I asked artists, would you share this video of the birds dying of the documentarian? It's only a 5-minute video clip. Would you share this with the young children? Why or why not? Interestingly, my teacher educator friends in Australia said, of course, because they already see birds dying in their daily experiences where most children live. And of course, then I'll just say this is very interesting. In the Pacific Northwest, teachers were like, well, I don't know. We'd have to talk to the parents first. I don't know. It might be too sensitive and you would protect the children. Very a different kind of perspective of thinking about children as very, you know, pure and can't be touched by the death of the birds. Anyway, sorry, you hear me dripping with my sarcasm there. But anyhow, this project has led us to a space where we have repositories for materials. We have carts. You can see the carts. We take the carts out and around to different classrooms. We have reclaiming Saturdays for the community. So the community comes in and they actually take materials back to their schools after they learn some project that we've been working on with our work here. We do a lot around identity and materiality and have the relationship between your identity and the material's identity, reclaiming the original identity of the material and looking forward with children to how is it changed now? What does that material property become? I'll give you an example. Angela Malloy Murphy and I wrote a piece about, and I think actually Pete, is Pete still here? I don't know. Anyway, Pete had converted that into a podcast for us. Oh, there you are, Pete, where we talked about the shiny bottle cap, the shiny spiky bottle cap, as being afraid of going down into the waterways to scratch the fish and harm the fish. And someone picking up the shiny spiky bottle cap and having a conversation with the bottle cap and how you can create keeping drawers similar to the Inventing Ramita Portland project. So at any rate, it goes on and on and on. So I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to share with you how documentation brought about new understandings and a way for us to think with reusing materials in the world. You know, we've taken so many journeys with it, all the way through to making things without ever adhering them, learning how to do that in wood, with wood materials, even creating, you know, like indentations in the wood where you can connect the wood pieces so they would stay together. And it's very interesting, our process. So it's been a fun journey. And I'll stop there and just open it up. Does anybody have any questions or comments or statements or anything they'd like to share about what I've shared? Um, where it resonates, where it doesn't. Yeah.
That was great, Will. Like, and you're right on time too. We've still got lots of time for question and discussion. That was awesome. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. Um, does anyone have questions? I have opened up, I've got in the chat, make sure you feel welcome to
Oh,
just resonances and responses too. Like it doesn't have to be a question. If it's just something that kind of speaks to you, feel free to
absolutely.
let Will know.
I'm going to stop sharing, and we can always go back to share something else if you want to see something else. And before we end, someone remind me in my last 2 or 3 minutes with you, I want to talk about small stories and where we've moved to, and I'll show you one small story. It's a
Yeah.
teeny tiny minute, 1 minute. Anyway, yes, Nicola.
Well, thank you again. Always interesting to listen to you, Will. I mean, I've been thinking about this and working with Rosie Fluitt in England as well, and
Mhm.
talking about how the whole idea of documentation from Reggio Emilia, then it became documentation, and then Veronica Pacini and her colleagues in the pedagogical narrations, and we've had variations on them. So I was really interested to hear you calling it documentation, as I know you've done that for a while, and B, I would like to sort of bring up the idea too about the co-construction of documentation and the point of it, because when it first came to Australia, I guess, as pedagogical documentation, it became like a chore for teachers rather than focusing on making learning visible. And, then it became like a display thing. And then, I mean, and I love the way you brought up that whole point, like, what's it all for? And that idea of the children going back and reflecting on it, I just think is so powerful. We've got some lovely examples of that here, of the value of it. And I was just wondered whether you would like to comment on that sort of idea of the purpose of, just elaborate a bit more, I guess, on the purpose of it, moving away from something that you feel like you have to do to appease parents or the childcare center or the school or what have you, but actually making it meaningful.
I'll tell you, I've had these because this documentation principles and practices, or however you want to think about it, largely has been such a big part of my world for so
Mhm.
long. I have this ongoing dialogue between me and what it means. And when I go back to Reggio, I would see something like documentation in a restaurant window about children sitting in chairs in a restaurant and all the
Yeah.
different ways children could sit in a chair in a restaurant. And I would think this is changing people's perceptions of children largely. This is like, and it doesn't have to. It could also be children changing their own perceptions of what they're learning about in school too. So like there's levels and layers. Um,
Mm.
and so sometimes I get really big with it, where it's like I really do want to take. Laura Smilaguzzi used to talk about taking the children out into the public square and
Mhm.
having them work in the 100 languages of children, so
Mm.
that people could see children's brilliance right in front of them. And I've had master's students do that, where they've taken children to the park blocks and created some sort of they're usually embedded in the middle of a project of some sort, and their children are creating publicly. And then one of my students who worked at Helen Gordon Center as a teacher, she was doing that with them, and she asked people who were passing by questions like, when you look at this, what do you see? What do you notice? What does
Mm.
it make you think? Do you think of children differently in any particular way, or is this how you've always thought of children, or things like that, to kind of
Mm.
enliven the conversation and take it to the public square. And
Mm.
that to me led her to the bread shop, which was another really interesting story about children's reused materials and recreating breads in the school with the reused materials that they would then take and host little panels in the bread shop where the owner of the bread shop said, please bring us what you're doing with making bread out of reused materials. And so they did. And then he wanted to help them to document that, to put that up in his bread shop. And he hosted a little 3x5 cards with questions so that people that would come buy bread from him could have a conversation back with the children and ask them questions about
Yeah,
what they were seeing.
that's
So,
such a cool
so
idea.
it's, yeah, it's such an interesting, documentation is often thought of like for the parent, to show the parent, the
Yeah.
child this thing at school, and it's to me, it's like when you get really innovative, really creative, and you engage your families in that creation,
Mm,
and they get really innovative and creative, that's when you begin to see those differences in
yeah.
perception of documentarian, like that we all can play a part without it being like everything all the time documented.
Mm.
Because we
But it
also
sort of
talk about
goes
that.
into the realms of curation as well, and having
Mhm.
to select, which is such an
Yeah,
interesting aspect of the meaning making process in terms of what you do, what you select, and what you leave out, and what you might come back to.
yeah,
I find, but that's a lovely story about the sort of moving into the public pedagogies aspect of it, and as a catalyst to see children differently and to document their learning and make it visible. Thank you.
yeah, sure. Thanks for the question.
I have a statement, a question, a thought. I'm not really sure. There was so much, Will. I really thank you. This is a wealth of information that's sort of come across me at the right time, let's say. So I'm going to be delving back into your recording because there's so much in this. So thank you for sharing. But I was thinking, I really love the co-creation with spaces, with galleries, and with artists. And that, that organic, rhizomatic sort of growth that just emerges out of that relationship, and it's a shared ownership, and it sort of dismantles power hierarchies and is more democratic, as you're saying. And I'm really inspired. I'd love to see more of that happen in Australia. I don't really, in my experience, I don't really see that happening. Galleries for children are curated by a person, an adult, that creates a space for the children. So there's that dynamic there. It gets rid of that. It gets rid of the spontaneous curiosity and inquiry, I think. But
Mm,
also in Australia, there's the child safety standards that have come in, which sort of have an impact on how we document the work we do with children. So when we're thinking about children in publicness, there's all those policies and barriers that can sort of get in the way and go into that universalist sort of idea or enclosure of children. And I've heard recently that in Australia, art galleries have to pay millions of dollars for insurance just to work with children. So they're actually stopping. They're not
mm,
doing that as
mm,
much as what they could do because of this financial burden.
mm.
And I don't know if I have a real question that's coming out of this, but I have a thought. And it was sort of like these pedagogies of enclosure, they reinforce that universalist ideology you were speaking about, but create a policy prison. And that policy prisoning locks out children from exploring their identity of publicness.
Mm.
Um, and I'd love to see us as early childhood educators try and chip away at that and find other ways around it. But I don't really have a question, just more of a thank you. And I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think I can chew on that for quite a while too. I think that's something. What I see is I go to Reggio and people ask a question, like here's one. Here's one of those questions that gets asked frequently by the U.S. Goers, which is, I noticed that children were down in the piazza by themselves for 2 hours without a teacher.
Mm,
And, that's just not possible where we are. We have to watch children and be in sight and sound of them every minute, or we're written up. And they're like, children's school?
mm,
The school where the children live during the day is treated like what? Like they don't, it's funny, and I know they know, but there's being, I'll use the word that you probably are familiar with, cheeky, you know, about it. But it's interesting to me to think about that kind of power, to be able to say This school is children's school.
Mm.
It's not teacher school for children. It's children's school. And so how is children's school constructed, I think is really important work. And for me, documentation opens the door to that kind of public discourse, public policy, the remaking of the public sphere around what children can do and children do. And we're in bad place in Oregon for sure. We are being regulated in ways that's like you must, if even if you have an open concept where all the teachers can see each other, you must still write down the time when a child came to your space working with you, right? It's your space, the teacher space working with you, and when they left to go to another space so that you can keep track of children.
It's highly
That's the
complex.
degree it's gone to.
But
Yeah, anyway.
there's a long history of facility policy and technical in order to keep people in control. So like in the 60s and the 70s when people were protesting at universities, in order to stop the protesting, they actually changed the facilities policies in order to control where people could meet.
Not too dissimilar to Unimel.
Well, yeah, so just kind of thinking about that those technical bits are often used to control in ways that may seem very benign, but in actuality, they're quite impactful. So I think you brought up something interesting, Jason, around the child safe policies and how there are impacts on it where it is in this idea of safety, but in what ways or what things are sacrificed and how does that change how we do things? And even the stuff you're talking about, Will, with how we check off something or what time or all of those things, they are about control and about ways in which that they don't necessarily match with the conceptual ideas that we're trying to think about or the pedagogical practices.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks,
Thanks,
Jean.
guys. Yeah.
Katie.
Yeah, I really want to jump in here because I just went through rating and assessment with the Department of Education at my child care center, right? So everything that we're saying about the child safe standards and the limitations that it puts on us, I just want to offer a tiny little story of hope, right? So I argued very effectively with my assessor that child safe standard 3, 4, and 5 were the most important standards, and that upholding those standards outweighed in importance the others, right? And I knew I was taking a risk doing that. And I don't know how familiar we are with all of those. I know for me, I can just say 3, 4, and 5, and I know what they mean. But so that's children and young people being empowered about their rights to participate in decisions affecting them and are taken seriously. Families and communities are informed and involved in promoting child safety and well-being, right? And then equity is upheld and diverse needs are respected in policies and practices, right? And I knew I was taking a risk by sort of presenting this argument and saying, I take toddlers, outside up the road, like they cross the roads and, we go into this place where like sometimes there are needles and, we have to kind of be mindful of place and connect with place and be careful in that. And I have these, procedures in place that help me do that. But the main aim here is that we are connecting with that place, right? And we're, able to really, really engage with it. And it worked. And I thought for sure in the back of my head, I'm taking a big risk here. Like I'm putting my center kind of in a rough spot. But I think, working within like the universalist ideologies and those tick boxes that try to control us, there are ways of impactfully addressing that within that system, which is how as practitioners we have to do it. We have to do it within the system, right? Those little resistances. And I think, I just want to point out to everybody that it worked this time, right? And I felt so good about it. And I just wanted to share that. And then I do have some other questions, but I'll let other people talk because we're on this sort of tangent right now with the child safe standards. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you. You were patient there. I could see you really wanted to say something for a while. That's an awesome example as well. And Will, in terms of some context too, there's been a big kind of expose in Australia recently around child safety, and there's been an investigation by the national broadcaster into the standards and the safety in a lot of childcare services in particular, and these kind of horrendous stories coming out in our media. So Katie's kind of story of hope there, and being able to work within, but also resist the limitations of the systems that we're working within is a great one. Yeah, and this is just a reflection. I heard that both of yours, Jason, and Katie and Jean, all of your comments made me think about, I was listening on the radio to someone talking about that the other day, and the presenter just went, well, you know, how soon do you think it'll be until we have CCTV then in all of these services? And the wash over me was really like, wow, that if that's the part where this conversation is going to go in the public realm, then that's certainly concerning. So your stories of hope, Katie, and certainly your discussion, Will, and this presentation of the ways that we can have and need to make children more visible within and engaged within our public spaces and our communities is obviously, you know, kind of can't be made more strongly at this point in time. But yeah, that's more of a comment than a question. Kerry, did you have a question?
Again, more of a sharing, Will. Thank you. That just has been amazing. This week I've been spending a lot of time out visiting preschools and kinders, visiting students. It reminds me of two stories. A few years ago, I had a friend whose mum came from Colombia. She spoke only Spanish and English. And a few days later, she said to me and to Lara, where are all the children in Melbourne? I don't see any children. In Colombia, there are children everywhere all the time. And we were like, oh, we don't. So she said that. So I thought they're not present anymore. During the week, when I was at a kindergarten, in fact, yesterday, the teachers were talking about wanting to take the children out, and they said, but you know what, the risk assessment is so arduous, we've got so much paperwork to fill in, you know, it's crazy, and then we have the child safe standards, all these things, so is it almost not worth going out and taking them out? And I said, well, you know, let's look at this, how, rather than saying that, let's have a look at how can we manage this, the risk, because we can't not take them out. And I shared that story. I said, you know, children aren't out and about or present anymore. They're all tucked in silos or behind, and the fences are even blocked off. So they can't even see outside the fence to see what's happening in the community anymore, because when I was a teacher, fences were not blocked off. We had the cyclone fencing where children could at least engage in the, you know, in the community. And they said, yeah, we just want to walk them around the block to talk, you know, to talk about it. And so I said, okay, well, you know, let's have a look at how can you navigate that so you can take the children out and into the spaces and do things rather than just go, oh, we're so weighed down. But you know, these conversations are happening all the time. So, and I was sharing a story about when, you know, I was a teacher, we just walked out the door. We just had a kind of a signature from parents which said, when you enroll your child, we go out. And off we went to do things, to engage, to, you know, find things, to take them to the reverse, we call it reverse garbage, unfortunately, it's not called that anymore, to go and choose a bag of stuff that they wanted. We took them with us. We got the little bus. So, you know, we've sort of come from that to now putting children in, as you were saying, in Oregon, they're doing too. You know, so scared that if a child gets hit on the head with something, you know, all the staff are going to be in trouble for that, like that sort of micro. So I think it's a really good question. How do we think about that? How do we have these conversations with the teachers? And, you know, how do we, and if I have time, I'd love to go back and talk to those teachers to say, you have this most amazing environment to take children, what can we do, rather than say, we can't do it, the paperwork is too much, we have so much documentation to do, so much pedagogy, you know, we have to document all this, plus we have risk, we have all these things. So I think we've just got to, you know, take the kind of, well, how can we do it, rather than how can't we do it, you know.
I am just going to speak for a second, sorry, Kerry, just because there is two questions in the chat, but we didn't get to your short stories, Will. Thank you to Pete who reminded me. I also forgot. So the question in the chat is from Julian. She says, thank you for your amazing share today, and it updates my mind profoundly. I have a question. How can teachers use digital tools in early childhood education while still supporting the many ways children naturally express themselves?
I have a short story on that. What perfect timing. I know there, Maya also has made a statement as well, and I think that would be useful to read and take a look at. This is such a great set of conversations. I will share with you this little story, and then I'll talk with you a little bit more about the digital technologies and what we're doing. Let's see if I can get this share up and going here. I'm not gonna put in presenter view. I'm just gonna show you. It's a small story. In last fall, I met with the Helen Gordon Center teachers, and the Inventing Ramita Portland project is on the 3rd floor of the school, in old dormer rooms from 1928 to about 58. Teachers lived there and then took care of children on the 1st and 2nd floor during the day as what they call day orphanage. There's actually a shower. We've renovated the whole space. It's really lovely with all the reused materials. We still have the bathroom with the shower in it upstairs, but these little dormer rooms have all this material. One of the rooms we turned into a digital atelier with reused materials. And so I'd like to share with you this short story. The reason why we did that was because last fall we met with the teachers and I had them work across each space. We cleared the spaces. We added a $100, I mean, I don't know what that is in your, for you all at this point, but we added $100 HD projector. People brought their laptops with them, or they used our iPads, and we connected the iPads to the projectors. We had like the little webcams that you can kind of snake around with your hand. We added that with a table and some small reused materials, and then we added large reused materials to each of these spaces. And what came of that was teachers' interest in how to work with this digital equipment to get everything to be moving parts to create the digital landscapes with the silhouettes in front of the digital landscapes with the big materials. What was showing on the wall, the digital landscape then, was the snaked webcam in the small articulation of what the teachers had co-created on the tables of the reused materials, with also some natural materials. We went on a walk and collected natural materials and thought about listening with the materials around the school and listening with the school and thinking with. And then when we put all this together, I've got a slide set of that that I won't show you, but we have been creating small stories to bring back to the teachers about our work in Inventing Ramita Portland project. So this story is pretty small. We've shared this one as of December, I believe is when we shared this story. So children were invited to play with light in our Inventing Ramita Portland spaces with Ramita materials. So Elliot notices his shadow on the screen. He follows his shadow and notices it's gone. He turns around and follows it again. And again. Uh-oh, he exclaims when his shadow disappears. He turns around and follows his shadow again. D'Angelo is intrigued by the sparkles coming from the disco ball. He tries to make the sparkles by holding the ball in a cup. No luck. He tries a new cup and the sparkles start. There are sparkles when D'Angelo holds the cup up. When he moves his arm down, the sparkles stop. Children notice the presence and absence of light. We observe them repeating actions throughout their explorations as if testing out a theory about light and shadow. We wonder, what can we offer to extend the possibilities for this inquiry? And that becomes the question for the community. So it's just a way to start a dialogue with children themselves, with the teachers, with the parents, within our community. And these small stories for us, sometimes they are very, very old. I actually just published a small story with Karina and Horsey, and that story's in Innovations Journal. And then that's where I got this notion for small stories. Small stories may just be an encapsulated teeny story, but it's so big because everyone keeps talking about it over and over again. Like, what's happening here? Why is this happening? And maybe it's a small story. Maybe it's about the child's shadow disappearing and saying, uh-oh. Maybe it's about the child raising and lowering the cup and the disco ball to see what happens with the sparkles. You never really know, but these stories exist every day, all the time. We made it pedagogical in the notion that we're asking for teachers to give us some of their ideas about our wonderings. And then we also just think about how the story itself encapsulates an experience that can go on anywhere. So for us, small stories become really big. And in this instance, the child is using more reused materials with the framework of the LCD projection. But in this same room, we've got the cameras, we've got different light effects that go on, we've got overhead projector, we've got all this digital kind of equipment, and children can access it and use it alongside of their explorations and their learning. And it turns into something over time. What I found is it turns into something that's the tool for them about many different aspects of what it is that they want to create and produce. We had a 3-year project that landed in the 3rd year, from using digital cameras to using digital video with handheld digital cameras. The 3rd year became stop animation, because the children, by the 3rd year of working with the digital cameras, the language of digital camera, they started to think about, as they watch stop animation, how that is created through a digital camera. So for me, that question is a resonant. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I'm addressing it at least a little bit, and I'll stop sharing. But I do think that's a really important piece of the work. For me, I think that we are trapped in our societies with parents and adults giving children passive technological means in order to pacify them during car rides, during times when parents need to focus, whatever. It used to be TV, now it's TV and the iPad and the tablet or whatever. And that's different than this very active kind of digital technological tool that they can actually use and then do something in the world to create. The first time I really thought about it was when I heard in Reggio that the teachers requested someone to come into the school to teach the teachers how to use Photoshop, because the children were scanning images in a scanner, which now you just take a picture and scan it in with your phone, you know. But back then they were scanning images, putting them into on the computer, and they wanted to manipulate them. And Photoshop was a way to do it. So they brought in an expert to help the teachers understand some basic premises of Photoshop. Then the children began to learn the language of Photoshop by playing with it. With some teacher knowledge, with some conceptual ideas of click here and you can do this, click there and you'll be able to do that. So it's very interesting to me where digital tools can go. Anyway, there's 16 messages. Oh my gosh. I love the conversation.
There's so many. That's great. We're really over time. I don't think anyone minds, but it's been absolutely wonderful. And I actually think all of us could probably sit and have this conversation for the rest of the day. So anyone who does need to go, feel free to go. But can we just stop there and thank Will with some applause to say thanks so much. It was actually just so interesting, and to me goes into so many realms that I'm interested in and that I want to explore and I want to be creative with. And I'm sure there's other people whose minds are just doing exactly what mine is. So thank you so much. And did anyone else want to say anything before we finish up? There is really good ideas in the chat about collaborations and things that we can do moving forward, drawing on the discussion and drawing on some of these examples. So I could create a group that we can continue this conversation, if you want, via email, where we can share those resources, if that works for people. Yep. That would be really good.
And reach out anytime. It's important that you just disclose that, like, for me, this work wouldn't be happening without you all, right? So for me, this is the reason why it can happen, is because you all come and you have your own investments in it. You walk away, you walk away as you, with whatever you picked up from whatever I've shared with you and whatever other people in the room have shared with you. And that's different for every single one of you. And I can't wait to hear however that touches your life and whatever you do. So reach out, email me. You just say, "Oh, I was at the I was at the Nicholas Lab." I call it Nicholas Lab. That's my short way of saying it. And and I was like, "Is it the STEM lab? What is this lab? It's so great." I'm excited to go talk to people in the lab. Anyway, so thank you all so much for being here, and with your active participation and listening, you help me make me who I am.
Oh,
Oh, you're so wonderful. And I'd also like to thank Amy, because as our seminar series coordinator, she's been so active and so brilliant. And so thank you, Amy, once again, for all the logistics side of it. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. The other important thing to say is that some of the images in Will's presentation are under copyright for a publication. So we do just want to take care with those. There will be a recording of this available online, and there will be a disclaimer on the bottom of that around the ownership of those images. But if everyone here can just be aware of that too, that would be absolutely awesome. And I will let you all know when that recording becomes available on the Global Childhood Research Hub website. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you later.
Thank you, Will. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.